Hi guys, Olive here today with the next installment in my ongoing series of videos all about the 90s PBS Kids TV show, Wishbone. In case you've never seen the show before, I will tell you that it was a half-hour program directed at kids, and every single episode was divided into two related storylines. The first storyline was always an adaptation of a work within the literary canon. Now, most often that was a book, but they also adapted short stories, plays, epic poems, myths, legends, folktales, anything like that. And then in the second storyline, we followed a 90s era family living in Texas with their pet Jack Russell Terrier Wishbone, of course. And whatever was going on with them in their storyline always connected back to the themes found within the literary adaptation. In this series of videos I do here on my channel, I look at one episode of Wishbone per video, and I compare the episode to the work of literature they took on within it. I highlight similarities and differences between them, and if there are differences, why the writers maybe made some of those choices. I give my opinion on whether or not the writers of the episode were faithful enough to the work of literature to give the audience a good sense of what it was all about. I talk about whether or not the writers pulled any kind of a moral message out of the work of literature to communicate to the young audience at home. And then finally, I give my verdict on whether or not it made for an entertaining half hour of television. In today's video, we'll be zooming in on an early season 1 episode of Wishbone that takes on Mark Twain's work of historical fiction, The Personal Recollections of Joan of Arc. That episode is titled Bone of Arc. Let's take a look. What's the story, Wishbone?
What's the story, Wishbone? What's this you're dreaming of?
At the start of this episode, Joe and David are lamenting that the best player on their soccer team just got injured right before their upcoming championship game. As a team, they're a lot better since David's dad took on coaching them, but without their star player, winning the game feels hopeless. Sam offers to fill in since she's a good player and her team was undefeated the previous year. The boys seem excited about the idea, but they'll need to talk to David's dad about it. A girl coming in to help out in a seemingly impossible situation reminds Wishbone of the story of Joan of Arc, a 15th century teenager who was instrumental in the French victory over the English in the 100 Years' War. A story that inspired the American author Mark Twain to write a book about her nearly 400 years later. In the literary adaptation section of this episode, Wishbone plays Louis, the best friend of the peasant girl Joan of Arc. A strange man in need of food and shelter wanders in one night. No one wants to help him. No one except Joan, that is. She talks her father into helping this man, and he ends up being a very nice man who extols her virtues and wishes that the whole country of France could have a hero like she just was for him. That night, Joan shares with Louis that she knows France will be victorious over the English because she will be the one to lead them in battle. She's frightened, but she's sure of it, and she needs to talk to the king about getting an army. When she shows up to talk to the king, an imposter is in his place on the throne, but she quickly spies the true king in the crowd. Her ability to see through his disguise impresses him enough to grant her request for troops. Back in Texas, David's dad feels uncertain about adding Sam to the roster, but he does agree to allow her to try out. And during that tryout, we see that this heroine too has impressive skill. She scores a goal and earns herself a place on the team. But then later, her other friends ask her if she's scared, because she's not signing up for just any game, but a championship game. Sam knows she wants to help out her friends, but hearing what other people think of it unnerves her. What if she lets them down? She goes to Wanda and Ellen about it, and they counsel her to try to focus on just doing her best and not letting what other people say sway her concentration. After that pick-me-up, she is ready for battle. Joan of Arc is as well. She leads her men into battle for France, but she's wounded early into the battle. Yet she still leads her army to victory. France will know freedom because of her. Our Texan soccer team is also fighting fiercely. Everyone shows up to watch the game, and Sam hits an early goal. Later, during a shootout, the opposing team scores enough points on our home team to force a tie. And then Sam is in the nail-biting position where if she makes the goal, she wins the game for the team. Well, she kicks the ball and scores, getting them the win. However, right afterwards, as the team is celebrating, the coach of the other team comes over to congratulate them, but then says Sam isn't a legal member of the team, so that goal she just made didn't count. David's dad insists she is a legal member of the team. He registered her properly and on time, but the other guy still says he plans to fight it. A glorious victory suddenly swept away. Joan of Arc knows a little something about that too, because she was captured by the English and sentenced to death. While she's a prisoner of war, Louis comes to meet with her, and she requests that he send a letter to her parents and that he remember their time spent together as children in the village. He promises all that and more. He promises to tell her story far and wide. Joan of Arc is burned at the stake with no one to help her, but her story lives on. At the meeting of the board to discuss Sam's place on the soccer team, David's dad reiterates to them that he submitted Sam's name with plenty of notice. But then he allows Sam to speak, and she says it was hard to join a boys' team, and that people doubted her ability to do it. But she overcame those things in order to do what she knew was right, and that was to help out her friends. She also highlights that it wasn't just her. The whole team won the game. Although the bloviating opposite coach wants to mention that she's the one who scored all their points. The board appreciates her statement and commend her athletic talent as well as the way she articulates herself, but they insist that they must follow the official rules. And that means giving the victory to the other team. They do ask that Sam try out for the team the next year, though. And everyone leaves in an amicable fashion. Back at home, everyone applauds Sam again for all of her hard work, for her contribution. They are still so proud of her. It doesn't matter that they lost the case, because no one will ever forget that winning goal. So let's talk about this episode, one of the very few where Sam, the girl of our core friend trio, gets to take the starring role. That always makes me extremely happy. Of course it would, as a member of the girl power generation. But also I'm glad when we do, just because she's a wonderful character and I love when we get to focus on her. I will also note before I go into my discussion about this episode, just so you know where I'm coming from, this book is one of the very few that I've read for my coverage of this series that I have ended up absolutely loving. Most of the works of literature I read for this Wishbone series, I would say I end up appreciating. I'm glad I have read them, so I have them under my belt. But there are only a very small handful that I've read for this series that have gone on to really touch my heart. And The Personal Recollections of Joan of Arc is one of them. And to think, I probably would have never picked up this book if not for this Wishbone series. Mark Twain worked so hard on The Personal Recollections of Joan of Arc. He did 12 years of research, and then he spent 2 years writing this book. And that was not his normal process. He did not need that kind of preparation time to write any of his more popular novels that you most likely have heard of. He poured so much love into this book, and it really shows. He even said that not only was this his favorite thing he ever wrote, but he thinks it was the best thing he ever wrote. And now having read it, I can see why he feels that way. It is wonderful, and from the looks of it, quite historically accurate. The writers of this episode weren't as accurate, and it was actually pretty surprising how selective they were in what they showed and talked about. There were things from the book, like that initial scene where Joan is persuading her father to let the beggars stay and share their food. That is directly from the book. But missing entirely is the religious element, which is so confusing to me. Joan was a very pious person in real life and definitely in the book. And her conviction to lead the French to victory comes from visions of saints that she was getting who were telling her what to do and what was to come. And so it doesn't really make sense that Joan would feel inspired to go to war without that influence. And it's especially important to know because later on she was tried for heresy. That's why she was executed. It wasn't just that she was captured by the other side. So I understand that the writers probably just didn't want to juggle that element, but the story just kind of feels barren without it. Similarly, like I was saying before, they claimed in this episode that it was the English who captured her and then killed her, but that's not strictly true. Joan of Arc was actually sold to the English supporting French, who then executed her. So I know to line up with the real life storyline, it was better to say that the other side won, but it was actually Joan's own people who betrayed her and put her to death. And the king that she was fighting so hard for didn't intervene. That's all pretty heartbreaking, probably way too much for kids to be able to understand. So that's a change I actually do agree with. In the novel, there are also significantly more trials that Joan has to come up against. Getting people to take her mission seriously in the first place, then trying to get the king to agree to any of her plans, which is like pulling teeth. And then finally, the actual heresy trials, which take up pretty much the entire third part of the novel, but we don't get to see them at all in the literary adaptation. All of that being said, I will give this episode credit. I'll give the writers credit because I do think that the spirit of the personal recollections of Joan of Arc is present in Sam's storyline, in the real life storyline. A girl enters a man's world selflessly, a boy's world in Sam's case, trying to help out. And while she's successful, forces align to wrong her, and that soils her victory, but definitely not her memory. I also really like that they showed Sam being scared and being influenced by what people think about this endeavor before she takes on that challenge. She's doing something fearless, but she's still experiencing fear, which I think is really important to show. And I also liked that because Sam's mom isn't really that big a part of her life as far as we can see, they showed Sam going to the two female characters who we know the best in this series, Wanda and Ellen. And the advice that they give her in that scene is really sound. Be brave if you're doing something that you know in your heart is the right thing to do. Don't worry too much about what people have to say about it. And don't let a technical loss get you down. I think these are all really important messages for kids. I think anyone watching would be able to relate to Sam's situation. And that situation is pretty closely mirrored in the Joan of Arc storyline as well. They are both winners and losers. They both have wins and losses in their respective situations. They exist somewhere in the gray area in between those two things, which I think most of us as adults know that, but I don't know that kids necessarily would. I'm actually really glad that the writers didn't have our soccer team win in the end. They had that victory stripped away because you can't always be a winner in life. And I think kids need to be preparing for that. And also, I love that they showed that team handling the loss as gracefully as they did. I think kids really need to see that. It's a nice episode. I mean, being as big a fan of the book as I am, as inspired by Joan of Arc as I am, of course it would have been nice if they had more closely stuck to the book and then therefore the real version of events. However, knowing how tragic of a story this is, I understand why they needed to change some things. I'm actually really surprised that they even showed the burning at the stake. I guess I should feel lucky that they were even honest about that part, because that is pretty hard to see. So I have to be understanding that they had to change things to make it more appropriate for a child audience. That being said, I do think they did a good job of capturing the spirit of the novel, which I think is what this show is all about. I think the two storylines matched up really nicely. I thought the pacing was good. The moral message was solid. A good episode. Those were my thoughts on this episode of Wishbone. I would love to hear yours in the comment section below. And if you would like to see more of these What's the Story Wishbone videos that I do, I have made a playlist that contains all of them. I have covered most of them at this point with only a few more left to go. So if you're going into that playlist looking for a specific episode, it is very likely going to be there. If not, it will be there very soon. Or maybe you just want to go in and experience the entire project from the very beginning. Either way, I will link that playlist for you in the description box below and up in the cards. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.